Welcome to In-Depth, a show that looks at mining developments in North America and South America. The Canadian government has given a red light to BHP Billiton's plan to buy Potash Corporation of Saskatchewan. Liz O'Hill joins me to discuss the issue. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Martin.
Why has the deal been rejected?
Well, as you know, under the Investment Canada Act, which was the regulatory test that the deal needed to get through in Canada, it needed to be proved to be of net benefits to the country. So early in November, Industry Minister Tony Clement stood up, gave a press conference, and essentially said that he determined that the deal was not likely to be of this net benefit. However, and this was something that surprised a couple of people, I think, who were expecting a final decision and explanation and so on. He said that by law, BHP Billiton has another 30 days from his decision to make further submissions and applications and try and talk to the government until the decision is final. So until those 30 days are over, Clement says he can't explain his decision or his rationale or his thinking for this no decision. However, obviously there's been a lot of speculation in the absence of any real explanation. And one of the things that people are looking at now, since the Investment Canada Act was passed in the 80s, only one other deal has actually been rejected by the government. So when BHP Billiton first announced its offer for Potash Corp, it was generally assumed that the deal should sail through approval quite easily. But after the government of Saskatchewan, and that's where Potash Corp is located, Potash Corp actually used to be a government company before it went public. The government of Saskatchewan really took a firm stand in the last few weeks against the transaction. Premier Brad Wall has been going across the country making speeches. He was in Toronto for quite a high-profile speech just about a week before the government announced its final decision. And he's really been campaigning against this deal. He's also received support from other provincial premiers. Alberta, the Premier of Alberta, which is where Prime Minister Stephen Harper is from, he expressed his opposition to the deal. A number of other premiers also supported Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall against it. And one of the things that Wall has been saying or arguing is that potash, the resources, the deposits owned by Potash Corp, is a strategic resource of Canada. Obviously, potash is used to make fertilizer, and food security is becoming an increasingly important issue in the world, he argues, and so he says it wouldn't be right to sell this resource now to a foreign buyer. Now, of course, the argument could be made that Potash Corp is already a publicly listed company, and the resources will have to stay in the Canadian ground, at least until they're mined. But this is the argument that Brad Wall has made. And so I think on the one hand, people are speculating that it may have been partly political, that the Conservative government needed to keep the support and didn't want to alienate the government in Saskatchewan and the people of Saskatchewan. And then secondly, the government may have been persuaded about the strategic resource argument. And then another interesting thing, although he later said that the comments were speculative rather than having any insight into the process, but the Agricultural Minister, Jerry Ritz, just the day after the decision was announced, actually stood up in the House of Commons and made some interesting comments. He said that if BHP Billiton was allowed to buy Potash Corp, that it would be too advantageous to Australia because he said that Canada and Australia market a lot of the same agricultural products, and that if an Australian company had now control or could offer this fertilizer, the potash, that it would give Australia too much of an advantage. But as I said, it may just have been, as he said later, speculation, but maybe that's also an insight into the decision-making process of the government.
Would you say this is a final no, or could BHP still get the deal through somehow?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think the arguments are being made and can be made very well both ways. You know, on the one hand, BHP Billiton has had a chance to speak to the government, to make promises to the government, and they really have seemed very committed to this transaction. So if there was anything that the company actually could promise or could do commit to that, surely they would have done it already. So in that argument, presumably it's something that BHP Billiton simply cannot change, possibly being a foreign buyer of this strategic resource. On the other hand, some analysts are saying BHP Billiton has gone so far in this transaction. They have committed themselves to it. CEO Marius Kloppers, we know he tried to complete a merger with Rio Tinto that failed. They then had an iron ore joint venture with Rio Tinto that recently was broken off. And so the analysts say surely Kloppers and BHP Billiton will sit down with the government, find out what those issues are, and somehow get over those hurdles. So we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose, while the 30 days are counting down.
And what happens next for both companies? Well,
for Potash Corp, the company has said quite loudly that it's talking to foreign rival bidders, rivals to the BHP Billiton offer, obviously in an attempt to fend off the hostile bid from BHP Billiton. But then the question is, if BHP Billiton can't get this done, if they can't meet the requirements of the government, the biggest mining company in the world, what other, presumably somehow with some foreign interests and party, could actually get the deal done? So unless Potash Corp has been talking to a Canadian potential buyer, then presumably if the deal is blocked on the BHP Billiton side, then Potash Corp will simply continue as a standalone company. Of course, while BHP Billiton was making promises as far as employment and moving top executives to Saskatchewan, investments, all those sorts of things, Potash Corp was making their own promises in an attempt to sway the opinion in their favour in Saskatchewan and in general in Canada. So they will, of course, now have to make good on those promises that they made. So I think the people of Saskatchewan will be watching that. As far as BHP Billiton is concerned, if the deal is blocked in 30 days' time, there's been some speculation from analysts and investors, I suppose, hopefully, that the company might look, obviously BHP Billiton raised finance for this huge 40 billion deal. And so people are saying the company may or should look at a share buyback if the deal doesn't go through. As far as acquisitions are concerned, it's such a big company that any deal to be meaningful really has to be big just to move the needle for BHP Billiton. So there has been some talk that maybe Freeport McMoran Copper and Gold in the US might be an appropriate target if BHP Billiton is still looking to complete an acquisition. And then some insiders, some people are saying that the company might do better to just look at buying up some of the assets that are being sold off by BP. So that's also a possibility.
Okay, thank you so much, Lizo, for your time. That was the show for today. Join us again next week for more news and insight on mining in the Americas. I'm Martin Joaquin in Johannesburg.